around that time, Kris, cooks and chefs and hospitality professionals were listed on the Bureau of Labor Statistics as domestic servants. And today, fast forward, X amount of years, in many ways, chefs are rock stars.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession.
The Burnt Chef Journal is proudly sponsored by Planday, the workforce management system that helps your business give a shift. From scheduling rotas ahead to tracking time and attendance, managing your team's careers to managing your budgets, Planday has everything you need to make your day work in one easy-to-use platform. Try it yourself with a 30-day free trial only at planday.com. Get your shift together with Planday. I'm joined this week by Kirk Bachmann, who is of royal blood when it comes down to culinary and hospitality professionals. So you've owned restaurants, you've operated in the restaurant field. You're also the campus president for the Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts, which, if anyone hasn't heard of that, then I think you must be living under a rock. It is the leading worldwide school and professional educational resource that brings the future and the most brightest and most incredible chefs into the hospitality professional. So, Kirk, I mentioned that I might butcher most introductions, and I hope that wasn't too badly butchered for you. How you doing?
Lovely. My parents will be very excited to hear the pronunciation of Bachmann as it should be pronounced.
Good. Well, I think that's a perfect note to begin with, which is that originally, despite the fact you're in Colorado currently, you're not originally from the States, hey?
Well, sort of. And first, allow me to say I'm just super, super excited and pleased to be here with you, Kris. And thank you for staying. Well, it's mid-afternoon for you, early for me. And yes, I'm sitting here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado, and it only becomes more beautiful. Yesterday, we had a little bit of snow, and I'm looking out at what we call the Flatirons to the west. And so they have a lovely sprinkling of the snow from yesterday, juxtaposed against the blue skies. And to my right, I sit in sort of a bubble here in my office. And to my right, I have eager pastry students learning the craft. And I'm speaking with you. So there's really not many better places for me to be. And then I get to, talk a little bit about my family and such. But Kris, to just go back a little bit, I happen to have the good fortune, didn't know that for many, many years in my life, but I have the good fortune of being a fourth generation cook, I like to say. My father has always said, just try to be a cook for life. Just try to be a cook for life. I don't know if you could see him here, but so that's my father, the shorter one. He's still alive, 88 years old. Ironically enough, he shares a birthday with Auguste Escoffier on October 28th. So he just turned 88. And that photo was taken in Dusseldorf, then West Germany, when he was working on his, what they called Meisterbrief. He became a master baker, which is required in Germany in order to own a bakery. Still today, you can work in a bakery without the designation of master baker or whatever, but you can't own one. But his goal was always to come to America, and that's what he did when he was 26, and along with many, many others, and went to work in the industry in Chicago. And that's where I came along, and then we moved back to Germany. So I had the good fortune of always being a Cubs fan for life, but my early years were in Germany. So I, learned the language unknowingly. And so I feel fortunate to have that behind me. And then years later, we relocated to the mountains of Colorado, and we've been in the hotel business, ever since. So, and my sister looks after one of our properties a couple of hours away. But, the DNA, I did everything I could, Kris, to not be a baker or a cook or a chef. I wanted to play center field for the Chicago Cubs. Then I wanted to be an interpreter at the UN, so I went off to college and did everything I could, but it drew me in. And and I'm so grateful now, years later, for, the odd lunches that I had when I went to school, looking over at my classmates with bologna sandwiches while I had, freshly baked rye bread with, some sort of horse meat on the top of it. And I always thought I was a little different, but, I think about it now, and I have 4 children and 4 grandchildren now. And I'm able to share those stories. And, it kind of relates to when I think about the topic of what we're talking about today and what you talk to so many people about today. It's not just about our industry. It's not just about our students. It's not just about our staff, but it's about our children as well. And I like to insert the word parenting in. And if I miss it, always know that there's a halo of whatever I say, I hope I demonstrate well as a parent. Gosh, I know my wife does. I probably miss the boat here and there, but she keeps me honest. So yeah, that's just kind of, who I am. I got into education about 30 years ago after being in the industry and working proudly as a cook, as a chef, and loving the craft. And, back in the days when there was no internet and you would finish a shift and then run back to your office and start creating the menu for the next day. And I have to say, Kris, it's not for everyone. No industry is, but for me, it was all I ever really was going to do is be in this industry. And then the opportunity presented itself for me to work with culinary students, first with the Le Cordon Bleu organization for almost 20 years. And then, of course, with Escoffier, Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts for the last, decade or so, with many of the same people over 30 years. My partner in crime, I say, is a gentleman by the name of Jack Larson, who was very, very instrumental in bringing Le Cordon Bleu to the United States. And now, he's my partner in Escoffier here in the United States. And so feel very blessed with that.
I spoke to Jack last week.
Oh, you did? You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
In a strange turn of events, I spoke to Jack and Chuck last week.
Oh my goodness. Really? See, they don't tell me everything.
Well, I'm not sure where we are with regards to conversations, but it was positive. It was really positive. I think he's an incredible bloke, obviously a visionary, philanthropist as well.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I think it's really interesting that an institution, something that's been around for decades, such as the Escoffier teachings and ways, is now looking at leading the new way with potentially partnerships with the likes of the Burnt Chef Project. I think it's so exciting, right? And I guess you've seen quite a lot of changes over the years. I think it's fair to say that you've got an incredible history. Certified executive chef through the American Culinary Federation, competition medalist. You're also a member of the American Academy of Chefs and the Disciples of the Escoffier as well. The list of accolades and titles goes on. So I guess from my perspective, I'm curious, what's different now compared to when it was, say, back in 1990 or even 2000s? What are the big changes that you're starting to see come in from that perspective?
Such a great question and great observation. I think, and I'll use my father probably a lot for, examples, perspective. Social media has changed a lot for what customers, guests' expectations are. Many times they know what they're going to expect before they walk through the door, right? I have to go all the way back to the 70s when we relocated to the mountains of Colorado, a very small community. And I have to, again, give my father credit. We bought this hotel and it had a small restaurant, and it was your typical restaurant. It was quaint, it was fine. It had a nice, very local centered sort of menu, right? Steak, potato, things like that. But our expertise was, of course, European cuisine. I spent a lot of time with an uncle of mine in northern Germany who's a chef, and learned how to make, sauerbraten and braised dishes and pork roast and goulash and things like that. That's what Wiener Schnitzel, that's what we knew how to do, right? And so I'll never forget the day, and I named the restaurant. My father never wanted to do that. My father's name is Joseph, Josef. And so we named it Joseph's, and I wanted to call it, European cafe or European cuisine or something like that. And he never allowed us to do that. He always wanted to be subtle and respectful in the approach. So he always called it American international cuisine or American German cuisine, so that people knew that they can come and have anything that they wanted. We were known for our soups. Our soups were not soup of the day. They were soup of the moment because they disappeared so quickly. And we slowly introduced a collection of specialties on the menu. And it was such a brilliant way. I can't take any credit for that. That was all my parents. It was such an interesting way to introduce a different type of cuisine to a local community that we needed to support us, right? So you could come in and still have a T-bone steak, but maybe the next time you came in, you might have Wiener Schnitzel with a fried egg on top and a little spätzle and red cabbage to the side. And it was really glorious, Kris. It was really sort of fun that people started to come out for that menu, right? And we never changed the approach. Joseph's American Continental Cuisine, whatever, we ended up calling it when we promoted it. So I just learned a lot. Today, we might call that unreasonable hospitality. Great book, by the way, Unreasonable Hospitality. It's this idea of just doing anything you possibly can to make your guest experience feel normal, feel like they belong. So whether, to answer your original question, so guest expectations have changed probably more than anything. In the classroom, Kris, what's really changed is that chef instructors, wherever they came from, and in 20, 30 years ago, most of our chef instructors were typically from Europe, right? These were seasoned industry professionals who found a second career being able to go into the classroom and share their craft, their knowledge for the next generation. But it was much more intense, right? It was, this is how we season. This is how we saute. It's demonstration followed by practical application. No questions, please, right? And what's changed is at Escoffier, we call this the flipped classroom. It's a very formal approach to education where our instructors are encouraged to be facilitators of knowledge. They don't know everything. And by flipping the classroom, they push information out to our students, whether online or on ground, in advance, allow students to digest that information, read about that information, practice that information. And then when class resumes, the instructor answers questions, encourages the students to find their voice, their culinary voice, if you will, their pastry voice, their nutrition voice, and ask the questions that they can't find on the internet, right? And for us, that seems to work. And if I can, you just cut me off anytime, Kris. I get excited about this.
No, you carry on.
As you connect all of this to the mind and the well-being of a student or of a person that's coming to school, and I can see my front doors right here, right? I ask our instructors a few simple things. Teach from the heart, listen to your students, be supportive, and also say please and thank you. So every morning, every afternoon, when the students arrive, our instructors are at the doors, greeting them, greeting our students. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And when they leave, they're at the door saying, thank you. See you tomorrow. Thank you for being here today. Hope you had a good day. And what that does in a strange sort of way, it lowers the anxiety level. It makes people feel that they are someplace where they belong. This is where I'm supposed to be. And it reflects itself in what we call attrition, which is people going away versus retention, people staying. And people want to stay because they feel safe here. They feel like they belong. I'm not sure that some of that byproduct didn't occur 20, 30 years ago, but today it's just so important. It's so in our face. Every student has one of those. They can find information anywhere they want, but they choose to get their information from us because of how we make them feel. We're not perfect, Kris, but this is what we try to do.
Thank you for sharing. I think that that's a really important point. We hear the whole reason why we exist is that often it's because people didn't feel that sense of connection and didn't feel that value, and maybe they're working in environments that are perhaps, you don't get a thank you, you don't get a hello, you don't get these simple things. And I think it's very easy to sort of just blame hospitality for being that way. And we've got a real PR problem globally. I mean, the UK especially, like, we really, really struggle with it. But I truly believe it is the most incredible sector in the world. It's a profession of choice. And to hear that the finest educational institution in the world is breeding that culture of mutual respect and of gratitude and of empathy from the very start of the culinary journey of these students is pretty impressive. And I'm really proud. And that's a story that I will be telling moving forward to audiences as well, to try and turn this rhetoric of, oh yeah, that's a really tough, unforgiving industry, isn't it, hospitality? So I really do thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important to recognize that that's happening.
Yeah.
Has that always been the case? Is that something that Escoffier sort of Academy has always done? Or would you say that this is a cultural change that's happened over the years?
That's such a great question. I believe, Kris, intention has always been there. Execution sometimes fails. For example, we have a student assistance program that we make available to all faculty, all staff, all students, but we didn't get it right off the bat, right? So we tried to work locally initially. Like, if students come to us with challenges, we're going to work with local organizations. And it didn't feel personal, right? It didn't feel like we were doing everything we could. It felt more like, call this number, right? Yeah. And this was several years ago, where we just have some really, really kind, wonderful people that work with us and great minds. And so we were able to establish through our benefits packages a pathway that was safe for all of our staff to be able to reach out to. And then when we saw that that worked, and that was a very sort of a comfortable way for staff to reach out, we cascaded that down to our students as well. And, like any other organization, especially school education organization, we have an incredible collection of student service employees that their number one responsibility is to reach out to students. And how do you do that? So on ground, or we call it residential, we know if a student's here or not, because they're either here or they're not. All right. And in the online world, all across the country, Kris, it can be very lonely. It can be very lonely logging into your educational platform in your home, in your basement, by yourself, in your kitchen. Mm. So we've tried to, through our diversity council, through our student portal, which has all sorts of sort of virtual places for students to come together in clubs or meetings of like interest. And our student service team watches very closely if a student has logged into the system or has completed their assignments, or makes themselves available for students to call them, right? In full transparency, that's probably our biggest opportunity right now, is rather than to wait and just reach out to someone once they trigger an activity or an event that causes the reason for us to call, is to welcome people. Jack and I were talking the other day, and we're talking about, kind of in a playful way, let's have a new promotion called Call Me, Call Me, Call Me, Call Me anytime. Call me anytime. I don't have business hours. I have student hours. Call me anytime. Because how can I say to a student that if you've got an issue, call me between 12 and 5? Yeah. That issue occurs at 11 and it's 6, so we're not perfect, Kris, but we're really trying. And I think we're learning every single day. And it's because of the hard work and intentional work that so many really good people, many graduates, by the way, many alumni come back and work for us in like the orientation realm, right? So for new students coming in, to hear from an alumni of their experience and what they can anticipate, it feels good. It makes sense. So we're trying every single day And, the progress is so evident. Today's Tuesday. On Sunday, we had graduation here in Boulder. We host the graduation on the campus of Colorado University in this beautiful cathedral-like auditorium where they host plays and orchestra and things like that. 2,000 people. The majority of those people, Kris, were online students from all parts of the country with their families that traveled to Boulder so that they could walk across the stage. And if you're not crying or at least moved somewhat by witnessing that, then something's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was chatting to Jack last week, from memory, if I remember this correctly without looking at notes, but he said 7,000 chefs a year, right? 7,000. That's a tremendous number.
It's a lot of numbers. And I always have to pull Jack back a little bit. Now, you can't call everyone a chef just yet, Jack. I tell students you are a chef when someone else calls you a chef and they sign your check, right? So we encourage them to, be a cook for life. Be a cook for life. Yes, your goal is to become a chef. But right now we're training you. We're preparing you for an industry that will pay you back, will respect you by referring to you as a chef. So I'm always careful with call them cooks, Jack. Call them cooks.
Well, he probably did. I think it's interesting. Obviously we do a decent amount of work. We'd love to do more out in the States, but you look at the difference between roles or terminologies here in the UK compared to the States. Line cook is obviously something that's quite prominent as a title. You just wouldn't get a line cook over here at all. And you see that difference with European countries as well. You talk about Germany and having to have a license in order to be qualified to be able to set up a bakery, in the same way that in Italy, you'll go to 4 or 5 years of culinary school to become, this qualified individual where the pay is great and the opportunities are tremendous. And I think that somewhere along the line, we've kind of lost that a little bit within the UK. And I was having a conversation with a business who turn over about £1 billion, so $1.4 billion today. And they were like, our culinary teams just are not respected enough. We just don't get respected. The impression is that we're low skilled and that we don't have the right qualifications. And that's something I'm really, really keen to improve, because I generally do think that people who are in all facets of hospitality, front of house, back house operations, marketing, sales, we are the most passionate and driven individuals that you'll ever find. And I've worked in finance. Trust me, the whole reason I stay in hospitality is because it is fueled by passion and creativity. And I think I went on a bit of a tyrant myself there, but ultimately, I'm quite keen to be able to improve the perspectives of this profession, this great profession, and to retain its heritage and its caliber as well. So I will refer to people as cooks until, as you say, they are getting paid. And chef is on the jacket. Chef is on the jacket.
It's a fun story, right? It's a fun story to share with students of the craft, so that you encourage them to continue to learn. Ultimately, if you want to be a center fielder for the Chicago Cubs, there's a process to go through, right? You go through the minor leagues and you're a part of the organization, but you may not be the center fielder until that announcer, refers to Kris, our center fielder here in Chicago. Now, with all that said, Kris, I have to be perfectly honest. There are many students who come to us, particularly online, who are career changers. Our student demographic for the virtual world tends to be more 25 to 45, right? So you find a lot of people who they've waited their entire lives. They've done the grind behind a computer screen, and that's it. Finally, I have the ability to keep my family safe. I can continue my job while going to Escoffier online. And then when I finish, I can pursue. Or someone who's in the industry and has never received a credential. They can continue to work while they get the credential. And I'm perfectly honored to call that individual a chef. And with respect, right? And then our residential campuses tend to be more so than ever before, to come back to your original question of what's changed. It's a very young population we call them a dependent student, right? So they may still be on their parents' taxes, right? They're 24 years old or younger. They may even be on their parents' insurance. And what I love about that cohort of students, Kris, is that they're here because they want to be. Something inspired them to lean towards pastry. It could have been a great high school teacher, could have been a grandparent, could have been television, right?
Yep.
It could have been a celebrity chef. During graduation, of course, I enjoy that because I get the microphone and the podium, for a couple of hours. So you're going to have to listen to me before I confer this degree upon you, right? I call them candidates for graduation until the last 10 minutes when they are actually graduates of the school, right? But I spent a lot of time talking about how Auguste Escoffier impacted the industry 100 years ago. An eloquent man, a handsome man, a smart man who cared about humanity, about sourcing locally, about the conditions that the cooks worked in. Shortly, he died in 1935 in Monaco. Around that time, Kris, cooks and chefs and hospitality professionals were listed on the Bureau of Labor Statistics as domestic servants. And today, fast forward, X amount of years, in many ways, chefs are rock stars. Most of the chefs that come onto my show, we talk about their love of music, top 3 bands, go, we talk about their motorcycles. We talk about philanthropy. We talk about how much they give back to the industry that has served them so well. We talk about the farmer more so today than ever before. We talk about where our food comes from. And that is really, really beautiful. Really beautiful. Sorry, I'm just rambling. This is a lot of fun. I hope you have about 2 hours for me here.
If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, well-being journals, plus a whole host more available on Worldwide Dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free-to-access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health.
So I'm on the same wavelength. Years before I set up the Burnt Chef project, probably 10 years ago now, I set up a food photography company. It was called Nose to Tail because my background, I was never a chef. So hands up, I'm a passionate home cook. Could never take on a life of a chef. I'm not ashamed to admit I wouldn't have the resolve to be able to do it. And I didn't have the patience back when I was younger to learn. But I used to supply chefs with fine dining ingredients. And just right at this moment, so I'm sat in the office. I mentioned at the beginning, I was sat in the office with an 8-week-old puppy. This puppy is a cross. Her name is Truffle. And if I look up on the windowsill right now, there is a jar of Italian black truffles in my window. All right, my lover. In my window. Because I'm training the dog to find truffles. And
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're out of truffle season. So I've got a jar of black, I think they're probably summer truffles, bearing in mind how much I paid for them from Italy. But yeah, I'm all in. I'm all in hospitality. I fell in love with this industry based on its seasons and its creativity and its passion. I think.
And what I love about that, Kris, is that our industry needs advocates like you as well. You love food. You love where food comes from. You love the craft. And it lends credibility when people like yourself advocate for the industry, for our students, for our staff. I love that.
Well, it's such an amazing industry. It's such an amazing profession, isn't it, really? I mean, where else can you walk into a venue, walk into any style of venue, whether it's in fine dining or nighttime economy, and have a bad day and leave feeling $1 million? Where can you experience flavors and textures and creativity that you've never seen in your life before. Your perspective can be expanded, right? And that's what I love about hospitality. The seasons, we talk about nose to tail and farmers and provenance. And I think that everything from the way that asparagus is cultivated and takes years to grow and then harvested and then carefully transported to your wholesale distribution and your food service network, to the delivery driver who greets the chef at the door and has an opportunity to have dialogue that could be impactful, and then all the way through the preparation and the craft and the skills, all the way through to the plate, where most of the time the customer has no idea the length and the journey that piece of single ingredient has gone on, but also the connection points that have been so impactful and moving for each person along that journey, from the farmer all the way through to that plate. I think it just blows my mind. And that's why I love this sector. And that's why organizations like both of ours are so critical to helping sustain the rate of growth and preserving this incredible profession, promoting it.
And the literacy, right? We owe it to our students to share our perspective on the industry and where food comes from. For a really quick example, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think it's relevant. We have a lovely relationship with a farm in Ohio, very small farm, 400 acres, comparably. And it's been there for years. It's called the Chef's Garden. And the family, the Jones family there, Farmer Lee Jones and his family, they did a lot of pivoting during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, they started providing restaurants around the world with what the restaurant wanted, with what the chef wanted. I'd like a squash blossom, the size of my pinky, because that's what I want. And, historically, the bigger the squash, the better, right? Pounds per acreage and all of that. And our relationship with them, our students all receive a little package from the farm before they graduate. Then our instructors get into their live sessions and explain what's in that box and how to use it. And then I do these sessions every 6 weeks with Farmer Lee Jones, right, for all of our students. So he can tell the students where that squash blossom came from, where that herb came from, what part of the farm. And again, we do that 100% for academic purposes, 100% so that those students go out into the industry with a narrative that makes sense. They understand, and they may even question where they land, right? Farmer Lee Jones always says he loves one question only. Farmer, what should I put on the menu? And his response is always, let's look at what's in season. What drives him crazy? You mentioned asparagus, right? He doesn't want to see asparagus on a menu in February. He just doesn't.
But I know. Peruvian, like over here, Peruvian asparagus in the UK is like, if it's not in season, and our seasons are shifting as well. I noticed this whilst in food service. Sure. Yeah. Originally it was April or May for about 6 weeks, and then it started to become earlier and earlier. But it's in season for a reason. It's because it tastes the best and it's available and the food miles are less. It's ill-advised to take on food that has been traveling for hours and thousands of miles. It's never going to be. It's like the Dan Barber philosophy, isn't it? Where you've got
a little bit, yeah.
Put a cherry vine tomato on a customer's plate and do nothing else to it. Like, it's maybe a bit of seasoning, maybe, you can dress it up, but allow the ingredients to speak for themselves because they've been procured in the right way, right?
You mentioned Dan Barber. The last time I was there, and I was there with my wife. It's probably close to a decade ago when I was there at Stonehill, and I'll never forget, because I think it was lamb. He was talking about lamb on the menu that night, and that it would have a perfume of lavender. And he explained why, right? How he moves his lamb around lavender field. And then even as recently as a decade ago, I didn't think about that until Dan mentioned it, right?
Well, again, this is what keeps me just coming back for more. Like there's a farm near me called Westcombe Dairy. They produce cheddar, big truckles, big 20-odd kilo truckles. And I went to this. He's made a man-made cathedral. Right, they have a robot called Tina the Turner, and Tina the Turner.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that.
But this is I mean, it is genuinely a robot, and the whole reason that Tina the Turner robot was put in place was to remove any possible elements of contamination in the cheese making process, right? Because every single moment has an impact on flavor, and he demonstrated this by punching and pulling out from one of these truckles a bit of cheese and said, "Taste it." And then he did it from another truckle from a different shelf and taste it, and it tasted completely different. I said, this one's more floral. He said, yes, that's because when we milked the cows, it was spring. And I was like, what? And the other one was more earthy, and it was from autumn. And I was like, these stories, it's this intricacy that means you never stop learning. You mentioned the lamb and lavender. I didn't know that until today. That's just inspires you more. And if it doesn't inspire you, then perhaps this isn't the right industry for you. You know,
right. Well, imagine how students are, because so much of this is so new to them. It's just so revolutionary. You know, and it all depends on how they grow up, right? A great many of our students that go to school online, believe it or not, if I asked you, you know, what states do you believe the majority of our students come from? You might get close, right? Florida, Texas, you know, big states. But the southeast corner of our country is where the majority of our students come from. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. Food is unbelievably important and has historical relevance in the southeast part of our country, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. That's centuries old, right? Well, at least a couple of 100 years old in America. But these are people that are really passionate about food, primarily because their grandparents and their parents were passionate about food. And these are recipes that have been in their families forever. They have the ability to learn online without leaving their families, without leaving their responsibilities, without leaving their community, because not everyone can just move to Boulder, Colorado. Has probably been the most eye-opening and rewarding part of all of this for me and when you see them cross the stage, these graduates, it all makes sense, Kris. It just makes sense. And you know, because I'm the provost and the president, I get really great emails from students who find me, you know, on the website, and you know, it's like, look at this, I made this for my family, and I've never made this before, and that kind of thing. It just never gets old. I could do this forever.
Doing a great job so far. Like, as I say, you sat literally at the moment looking at the future generation of pastry professionals. Oh, isn't that, again, I mean, that's a craft in itself. I'm always inspired whenever you go to the pastry section in kitchens, and just the level of detail, and especially with the skill sets of modern gastronomy and other elements like that now being involved. It's like a science. It's like science and art combined. It's incredible. I'm curious, we've spoken a lot about sort of entry into hospitality and what it is that gives people the impetus to join this great profession. Where do you see the biggest changes over the next few years? You mentioned there's a lot of young students coming into hospitality currently. Are there any sort of whispers or any sort of predictions that you make for the future of hospitality in the next 5 or 10 years?
You know, that's probably the topic I've thought about the most as I anticipated chatting with you. And if time allows, I'd love to premise my response to that with a little bit of a story, if that's okay. And I'll try super hard not to get too emotional, right? I mentioned at the onset that, you know, parenting, guidance for faculty, for staff is super, super important. And like in my home, I give my wife, Gretchen, most of the credit because she's so in tune with our children and is so proactive in helping me understand what our response is going to be for our students, because she's always thinking forward, more so than me, right? Yeah. I'm like a cat on a hot tin roof going 100 miles an hour, and she's so in tune into what our children are experiencing. And I take you back 41 years, Kris. I had started college. I told you that I was trying to do everything I could not to be a chef. I was actually trying to play baseball in college and all of that. And then I got the craziest news, right? That, you know, I was going to have a kidney transplant. like, where did this come from, right? It's a hereditary thing. It's a whole nother podcast. But I have to say, when you think about what that can do to a young person's outlook on life, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And I'll never forget. So my father donated a kidney. I was 23 years old, 41 years ago. I'm here. I'm in the hospital with my parents, and the social workers, are trying to be empathetic and all of that, and, outlining the rest of my life. You can submit for Social Security. You'll never have to work a day of your life. God bless, my mother, Marlies, for throwing them out of the hospital room, right? She wasn't having any of it, right? This is my son. He has a dream. This is what he's going to do. We're taking care of this today. And I've never looked back. She's never looked back. I have a beautiful relationship with I feel so connected to my father. He's in me, right? He's in my body every single day. And the reason I brought that up is that had it not been for my mother's foresight and thinking, I may have been persuaded to just get lazy, right? I may have been, depressed. I may have, given up. And it's not in the DNA, but I believe we have an obligation. And when I think about the future of mental health and culinary education in our industry and the world for our children, a couple of things. I think that we will find, I know we're working on it, that mental health has to be a part of education. We don't have to be experts, but we can't be fearful of talking about it. We can't be fearful of being kind. We have to continue to say hi and welcome and goodbye and have a good day and be in tune with our students and our children. I've also coached my son for years in baseball, and we see the same thing. Students who can't, or little players who think they can't do it, because they've been told they didn't run fast enough and they didn't slide quickly enough and they didn't swing the bat fast enough. It's the wrong approach. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a place on the team, if you will. And I think just like with our student assistance program, it's really, really important to celebrate awareness, perhaps building it into the curriculum from an awareness perspective. It's just as important as knife skills and food safety, addressing the challenges that our young people today are going to face around the economy and the cost of goods and how expensive it is to just buy a home, all of that. These are all things that weigh really, really, really heavily on people. So I guess in summary, what I'm trying to say, Kris, is that when we think of curriculum and the skills that our students need to learn, we need to focus on both the technical and the emotional. We have to, read the room. How do you present yourself? We recently acquired, it's probably a year now. We acquired a hospitality recruiting company called Gecko, one of the largest in the country, right? And in fact, we just opened up our very first international location in England. And
England, Edinburgh.
Yeah. A wonderful gentleman runs that organization for us. But again, this was Jack's foresight. We have a great curriculum. We have great teachers. What about afterwards? We need to connect our students to the industry in a very, we can't just push them to LinkedIn. We can't just push them to Indeed. We have to facilitate the process. We have to listen to them. We have our students create resumes the minute they start school. They start thinking about the end game as they begin, right? And many of them, Kris, change their mind. I thought I wanted to be the chef of a fine dining restaurant. I've fallen in love with the idea of taking care of our elderly in an assisted living facility or vice versa, right? I don't know how it is in England, but 60% of our population in America in the next 10 years will be 60 years of age or older. Yeah, someone has to take care of them. I want to cook for them, and I hope our students do too.
I totally agree with you. I think that there is also, I remember 10 years ago when I used to run sales teams and I used to employ ex-chefs, or they were chefs at the time, and I would train them to be honorable, authentic, honest salespeople, not look, I've got a bag of frozen chips out back. I can do them for you half price, but what's on your menu, chef? How can I inspire you? How can I work with you? And I had a few people I spoke to back then who said, I don't want to be doing 7 days a week. I don't want to be doing X, Y, and Z. I want more time to spend with my family. And this is long before COVID. And I said, well, have you ever considered a career in a care home or a nursing home? And the response is the same. Well, no, I'm a chef. I've got skills and all this sort of stuff. And I kind of took it upon my personal mission because I spent a lot of time in care homes and working with the chefs in care homes. And these guys and girls, sorry, guys is a sweeping statement, are magicians. Like when you look at subjects like dysphagia, for example, and understanding that you have to get your food into 7 different textures to be able to be consumed and swallowed, but then understanding that it needs to hold the nutritional value and that if it smells or tastes like something else that the resident is familiar with, then it brings back all happy memories, especially for people who are struggling with dementia where dysphagia is present. Like, you're talking about modern gastronomy techniques here in an environment which historically, you would think, oh, well, yeah, it's blended this, blended that. But this is next level stuff. It's not just measuring out your protein and your carbohydrates and making it look presentable, but this is a whole new level. And so I felt quite passionate about actually representing that side of things, the healthcare system. Our job is to promote that there isn't just a one size fits all. It's not the next boiling point or the bear. It's not about becoming the next Michelin star chef all the time.
It's such a poignant point. What you're talking about there, Kris, is sort of this chefs and students walking by all the time. That's why I'm waving. You're talking about this gap between, let's say, a dietitian and a chef, right? There's a gap there, and it's important that we provide this comprehensive education, if you will, that addresses the whole mind and the whole body as you age. I was literally talking to someone about this just yesterday, this idea that, and it was one of our online students who came here to walk at graduation. He was in our online plant-based program, and he got the job of his dreams running a bistro at an assisted care center, right? And he has these conversations with his clients, his residents, about salt. Salt's the first to go, right? And we have an obligation to not just give them more bacon, right? We have to find other ways through citrus and herbs to appease that desire, that need they have for that infusion of salt that they've been used to for 70 years, right? So it really is a magical place between a dietitian and a chef where we have an opportunity to do something. You mentioned dysphagia. I mean, it's a real opportunity to do better and not just, assisted living facilities are not just about soup and sandwiches. It's about healthy, mindful, nutritious wellness, right? As you live out your lives. I'm really, really passionate about that. A couple of years ago, we launched a holistic nutrition and wellness program that a lot of people have found. Again, it's not that you're not going to become a licensed dietitian. You may with your knowledge, but it's that middle ground where we're trying to help people create incredible menus that address, the whole body. But this is what I love about the program. You still have to learn how to use a knife. You still have to learn about food safety. And then we just take a different path in terms of how we define wellness and with different approaches, maybe, less protein, less cream, less butter, that kind of thing, but it's still delicious, right? And Auguste would be proud because it's still focused on techniques, still focused on, you still have to know how to handle a knife.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's fascinating. And it's so hard to put into words passion that I have. And I know there's shared passion, and we're fighting so hard to be able to keep those stories alive. I think that when people see the Burnt Chef Project, they're like, 86% of people are struggling with their mental health. And it's very much a case of they think that we're here to harm rather than help. The story that I always tell is that I started this project 5.5 years ago because it was designed we're in the fucking trenches. We are getting our hands absolutely filthy, pulling out people left, right, and center, but then reinforcing the trench walls and actually starting to sign peace treaties. We're here trying to do everything we can to try and make sure that this is sustainable and healthy by making sure the foundations are strong and rigid, and working and partnering with some fantastic organizations to do that across the globe. But in reality, we have to acknowledge, as you mentioned, we are responsible for the whole human being. And whilst there's a professional boundary in terms of that responsibility, if we want to achieve those heights, those upper echelons, those accolades, that sustainability of attrition, improving retention rates, we need to be looking at a whole systems solution rather than just a skill swap. So...
Well said. Totally stealing that.
yeah, sorry. Do you know what?
Well said.
I've done a lot of I think there's probably close to 200 podcasts now, and I probably not felt this passionate, and you fueled something in me, Kirk, again, just that this is the reason. And I never lose the reason why we do what we do, but it's meeting individuals like yourself who have been around the industry for a long period of time, who are involved in creating a new wave of thinking and skills and improving the industry from the very ground upwards. That, yeah, I thank you for inspiring that in me on this late Tuesday.
As you just mentioned that, I thought for a moment, and they tell me that people do watch the podcast outside of my immediate family, so I'm happy about that. But when you just mentioned that, I thought about a chef that I interviewed a few weeks ago. His name's Kelly Whitaker. He's very successful here in Colorado, has Michelin star restaurant in Denver called Wolf's Tailor, and several other restaurants. But Kelly he's really busy. It's hard to get a hold of him. I usually get a hold of him through his wife, Erica. But when he was on the show for 1 hour, I had Kelly with no distractions. And he is a beautiful human being, beautiful man, and spoke so openly about his team and how they support everything he envisions. And you don't get that sometimes, Kris, from swiping through the internet. You just don't get that story, right? You don't get that relaxed truth, right? And, we're all busy, and I usually do my podcasts on Tuesday mornings around this time. And it's the most well-spent hour of my week, just so you know. As this has been. This has been absolutely lovely. Lovely.
Okay. I hope I hadn't let you down. I wouldn't want to start your Tuesday on election day with a massive...
No, this has been really... And interestingly enough, I spend a lot of hours preparing for the shows, right? Looking on the internet and all of that. And I was really excited today to just speak freely, off the cuff, from memory, from the heart, and you facilitated that beautifully. So thank you for that. Any anxiety that I had has gone.
Good. We from a branding context, I'm pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
From a personal
you could
context,
use that. You could use that. Yeah, in your marketing plan for 2025.
Yeah. I mean, Kirk Bachmann, you heard it here first. We reduce anxiety for, I think that's really cool. And I think it's a really prominent point to end on. But before we do, a question that we have for every guest, and one that I'm always curious, because there's a lot of work that we do as educators, as support networks for the future generations. But you mentioned earlier on, mindset is one of the biggest barriers we have to growth. Whether that's mindset that we've adopted from what we've been told, or whether that's a challenge or just a lack of perspective. I struggled with that until I was in my early 30s. And once that pressure was released, Burnt Chef Project came out of it. So my question to you is, if you were to travel back in time and you were to meet a younger version of yourself, say around 18 years old, you're a baseball fan, looking at going into sports as a full-time career, what advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you know now?
Well, that is such a good question. My question for every guest is a lot easier. It's like, what's the ultimate dish? This is a beautiful question. And as you might anticipate, it comes with a little bit of emotion. I know that I have spent my entire life, and this is not a negative by any means, but I've spent my entire life trying not to let people down. I never wanted to let my father down, never wanted to let my children down. I don't like to let Jack down. I don't like to let my students down. And if I had to give myself advice 20 years ago, I might say, hey, as you venture into the world, cut yourself some slack. It's okay. Don't be so hard on yourself. And I think a lot of young people today are really hard on themselves. My son, Joseph Henry, named after my father, is a freshman in high school. And I've never seen anything like this, Kris. You can follow everything they do all day long academically. If they've turned a paper in, if they haven't turned a paper in. And I'm fascinated by it, and I'm probably somewhat obsessed about it. And my son is coaching me. Dad, please trust me. Don't look at that every single day. I got you. And I'm not going to push him like I got pushed when I was younger. Cut yourself some slack. Give yourself a break. Everything will fall into place. I asked my son how he's doing. You know what his typical response is, Kris? Good enough, Dad.
Good enough. That shows a tremendous amount of resilience. It's hard, right? The expectations. Yeah, we were fortunate enough to be around before the days of modern technology. I mean, Christ, before even the internet was born. And yes, kids, you heard it here first. The internet hasn't always existed. So we were used to a world without wider expectations on what society dictates you should be. You knew that from school and from your parents, and you compared yourself to other people around you. But you never had the sheer volume of external influences that you do now. And to have that approach that, I'm doing good enough. I'm happy. I'm content. I'm moving forward.
Good enough. Imagine the pressure. To your point, our parents, us, growing up, we only had to defend our grades quarterly. And now it's almost daily, right? It's a lot of pressure. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I need to remind myself every once in a while to just cut people a little slack, right? It's imagine walking into a kitchen where a student is making their first tomato concasse, and instead of saying, could be a little sharper, your sizes are a little off, imagine just saying, wow, it looks like you've done that a few times. Imagine what that does for a student, right? Hey, chef said that I got this. And concasse is not easy, right? It's got to be perfect.
That's fucking profound. That's really, really poignant. And it doesn't cost anything, does it? Right? It doesn't.
Not at all.
Sorry, I curse when I get excited. Like that's that.
I cry when I get excited.
We've all got our tips. It's good. It's good. But that's so important. You can almost see it's like the butterfly effect, can't you? You can see which way around it goes. That's not good enough. Do it better. Which, for some personality types does work. Like for me, it works. I push myself harder and harder, but I think within context. But also to have that reassurance and to bolster that confidence and to go, that's good. You can tell you've done that. What else? What would you do differently next time? And to go to like a softer route, I think is really powerful. And I think that's a really, really good point to end on. So, Kirk, if people wanted to find your podcast, where could they find more content like that you
Absolutely. The easiest thing to do is to go to escoffier.edu. That's our school's website. And the podcast is on one of the links up on top. The podcast is called The Ultimate Dish. Got over 100 episodes there. And some of the really exciting ones are the one that I did with my father a couple of years ago, Michel Escoffier. He gave an absolutely beautiful, beautiful interview from his terrace in the south of France.
Nice.
But it's a lot of fun. It is not political. It is not controversial. It is literally about the guest, and I just follow them around, and it's a lot of fun. Thanks for bringing it up.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you. I'll take a listen, and we'll put the details in the show notes. But Kirk, it's been an honor and a privilege, so thank you very much.
The honor's been mine. Thank you. So nice to meet you, Kris. Absolutely. And take care of those puppies.
Yeah.